The Trek Supercaliber debuted in 2019 as a striking short travel full suspension XC race bike. Now it's earned plenty of success since then, but 4 years is a long time in the XC world, and the Supercaliber was no doubt due for an update. Well, here we have the Gen 2 Trek Supercaliber. It features a brand new frame, an increase in travel, and a redesigned IsoStrut. So how do all the changes play out on the trail, and how does it compare to the old version? We've been testing the new Supercaliber for the past few weeks to find out. The Supercaliber is Trek's flagship full-suspension XC race bike, and the new version continues to be built around the distinctive IsoStrut suspension platform, though rear travel has increased from 60 to 80 millimeters. Up front, you'll now find a 110 millimeter travel fork, though Trek says you can run between 100 to 120 millimeters to further fine-tune the geometry and handling. The OCLV carbon frame is all new, and it's now produced in two variants, the SL and SLR. The two frames share an identical swing arm, though the main frame is different, with the SLR version utilising higher modulus fibres to reduce weight by 150 grams. The IsoStrut shock is also brand new. It's now manufactured in partnership with RockShox, and it's heavily based on a regular SIDLuxe shock. It still features adjustable air pressure, rebound damping, and a two-position lockout, though the stroke has increased to 40 millimeters. Trek says that the leverage rate is both higher and flatter, with the goal of improving small bump sensitivity and grip. The IsoStrut stanchion has also grown to 38 millimeters, which is the same as the upper tube on a RockShox Zeb. In fact, the wiper seals and the internal bushings are actually identical, which is pretty cool. Despite the added travel, there's still been a keen focus on efficiency with the new Supercaliber. Trek has moved the main pivot 10 millimeters upwards, increasing the level of anti-squat to better resist pedal bob. It also means you can fit a larger chainring, up to a 38 tooth, without sacrificing the snappy pedaling performance. Along with the new frame, there have been some noteworthy updates to the geometry on the Trek Supercaliber. The head tube angle has slackened out 1.5 degrees to 67.5 degrees. The seat tube angle steepens by 0.5 degree, that's now 74.5 degrees. The reach has grown by 10 to 15 millimeters per size. On the ML size that I've been testing, that now sits at 450 millimeters. The chainstays are also 5 millimeters longer. The rear center length is now 435 millimeters. And factoring in the increased rear travel, Trek has lifted up the BB slightly, though the BB drop still remains at a healthy 46 millimeters. There are 6 models in the Trek Supercaliber range for 2024, and prices will kick off at 9,000 Australian dollars. The bike that we've been testing sits one step up. This is the Trek Supercaliber SLR 9.8 GX AXS, and the current price on this is $12,000. It's built around the high-end SLR carbon frame and the IsoStrut SIDLuxe shock. We've got a RockShox SID fork with a Rush RL damper, a SRAM GX Eagle transmission and level bronze 4-piston brakes, a Bontrager RSL one-piece carbon cockpit and 125mm travel dropper post, and we've got the Covey Pro carbon wheel set and brand new 2.4-inch wide St. Anne tyres. Confirmed weight for our Trek Supercaliber test bike is 11.62 kilos, and as usual, that's without pedals and with the tyres set up tubeless. Now that is higher than the claimed weight, and it is on the heavier side for an XC bike at this price point. Of course, the dropper post adds weight, and it's worth noting that the Covey wheelset is the older version, which features heavier rims with a deeper profile. On the note of weight, the Supercaliber SLR frame is claimed to weigh 1,950 grams, including the shock. Now, while Trek does claim it's lighter than the old frame, that isn't entirely true. If you'd like more info about frame weights and how the Trek Supercaliber compares to some of the competition, I've put a link in the video description below which will take you through to the full review. In there, you'll find loads more detail about sizing and suspension setup, so click the link if you're keen to check it out. Now, having spent a heap of time on the old Trek Supercaliber, I was really excited to see how the new bike would compare. However, I wasn't totally loving it during the first few rides. Indeed, the claims of improved sensitivity weren't really playing out on the trail, with the back end feeling somewhat harsh. This wasn't a total surprise, as the IsoStrut assembly does require some time to bed in, though out of curiosity, I decided to pull it apart to get a closer look at the internals. It turned out that while it wasn't bone dry inside, there wasn't a lot of lubrication fluid present. I gave it a clean, pumped in some fresh oil and bolted everything back together. Straight away, the rear end was feeling better and it gradually became smoother and more sensitive over the course of the next few rides. Indeed, the Supercaliber has gotten better the more I've ridden it, with the increased travel offering noticeably improved sensitivity over its predecessor. Seated comfort is excellent, with the rear end generating usable grip whether you're in or out of the saddle. Of course, it's not as plush as the longer travel Orbea Ois or the Scott Spark, but for most XC racer types, the Supercaliber will be sufficiently comfortable, and it's obviously way more compliant than a hardtail. The high volume tyres allow for lower pressures and more cushioning across sharper edges, while the 110mm travel SID keeps the front end tracking nice and smoothly. The bigger chassis is a great match for the sturdy Supercaliber frame, offering a considerably more planted ride quality compared to the skinnier forks that came on the old bike. And being able to drop the saddle out of the way also makes a huge difference to confidence on the descents. Combined with a slacker head angle and the longer wheelbase, the new Supercaliber is no doubt a more stable bike at speed. Despite the improved suspension performance, it's clear that it's lost none of the ruthless efficiency of its predecessor. The lockout remains somewhat superfluous, which is lucky because I couldn't really activate the twist lock remote due to the poor placement of the dropper lever. Aside from locking out the fork for out of the saddle sprinting, you can otherwise leave the suspension open all the time. It is incredibly responsive under power, which is a combination of the shock's compression tune and the high level of anti-squat built into the frame's kinematics. It lights up technical climbs, with the slightly higher BB offering decent ground clearance over technical features. There's also great lateral stiffness through the chassis, which is one of the key advantages of the IsoStrut design compared to a bike with a conventional swing link. This gives the Supercaliber a near hardtail level of rigidity, with a sharp and agile feel when darting through corners. Steering inputs are transmitted with minimal lag, and I found myself subconsciously taking inside lines whenever possible. There is nothing vague about the handling, and you get a really good sense of what the terrain is doing beneath you. This is particularly beneficial across softer trail surfaces and through dusty berms, where you can better modulate your weight distribution in order to maximize the tyre's grip. While it is smoother and more stable than its predecessor, the new Trek Supercaliber still doesn't offer the same level of big hit confidence on the descents compared to the Spark or the Ois. It's surprisingly well controlled thanks to its sturdy chassis and well-balanced geometry, but you can still run out of travel when pushing hard across rocky terrain. There isn't a ton of support from the rear suspension, and that means you can bottom it out on bigger and harder landings. With this in mind, I'd suggest that heavier riders and anyone wishing to run more than 25% sag will need to add a volume spacer into the air can to increase progression. I personally found the stock setup worked fine as long as I exercised a little nuance and chose smoother lines as I would on a hardtail. Even still, the Supercaliber does exhibit noticeable feedback through the drivetrain across high-frequency chatter. This is the downside of the higher main pivot, which results in increased pedal kickback that's particularly noticeable on rocky and technical climbs. Now, you could mellow out this sensation by fitting a larger chainring, which would reduce the chain growth as the shock goes through its travel. As for the overall parts package, it has to be said that our Trek Supercaliber test bike doesn't exactly represent amazing value for money. Then again, most of the budget has gone into that gorgeous SLR carbon frame and the efficient IsoStrut suspension. And while not overly blingy, the parts on our test bike have worked pretty well. The GX transmission is excellent, and while the level brakes haven't been totally quiet, they do offer good power and feel. The Covey Pro wheels have been solid, though as a lighter rider, I haven't found the carbon rims to offer a lot of compliance over rocky terrain. The free hub is already starting to show signs of contamination, so you'll want to stay on top of maintenance in order to avoid premature bearing wear. As for the new Saint Anne tyres, I found these to roll really well and provide predictable grip on dry and dusty hard-packed trails. Unfortunately, the rear tyre has had a hefty wobble in the casing from new, which is a bit disappointing from a quality control perspective. They were also nearly impossible to remove due to an incredibly tight interface with the plastic TLR rim strips. Luckily, I didn't have any punctures throughout testing, but if this were my bike, I'd be replacing those rim strips with regular tubeless tape as soon as possible. I've also not been stoked on this bike's cockpit ergonomics or cable management. There's been some cable noise from inside the frame, and the bird's nest in front of the handlebars spoils the otherwise clean lines of the IsoStrut platform. I'm also a bit disappointed that Trek has gotten rid of the knock block steering limiter. On our test bike, the handlebar controls are able to contact the frame, which could result in some unfortunate damage in the event of a crash. Otherwise, it is nice to see the Supercaliber equipped with a conventional headset, and the option to carry 2 bottles is great for longer distance trail rides and marathon racing. There's also masses of mud clearance through the rear end, which is something you'll be thankful for when the weather turns south on race day. Now, when it comes to comparisons to the Trek Supercaliber, none are more apt than the specialized Epic World Cup. Launched earlier this year, the Epic World Cup features a similar frame shape with the rear shock partially integrated into the top tube. Suspension travel is almost identical, and it also gets a custom shock that's manufactured by RockShox. Now, both are incredibly efficient short travel XC race bikes, but the way that the Epic World Cup goes about things is quite different. If you are keen to know how the two bikes shape up, I've put a detailed comparison in the full review over at flowmountainbike.com. Just click the link in the video description below to check it out. As for our verdict on the 2024 Trek Supercaliber, with its new frame, updated geometry and redesigned IsoStrut, this is a welcome evolution over the original. Some folks may be disappointed that it doesn't look all that different, and for sure it isn't a radical departure from its predecessor. It's still sharp, efficient and highly responsive on tight single track, making it well suited to racing dirt crits and short track XC. The suspension is notably improved, however, offering better grip and small bump sensitivity. Along with the bigger fork, the dropper post and the 2.4-inch tyres, the Supercaliber exudes more confidence on the descents and greater stability at speed. It isn't exactly a flawless package though, and we've not been blown away by its weight or value for money. It's also not as plush or as supportive as some of its longer travel competitors, and that makes it less versatile outside of the race tape, especially on rockier terrain. But if you're serious about XC racing and you value efficiency above all else, you're unlikely to find a more focused bike than the Supercaliber. It does a marvelous job of straddling the performance gap between a hardtail and a full suspension bike, offering razor-sharp handling and crisp pedaling performance with just enough travel to get you out of trouble when needed. Now, if you've got any questions for me about the new Trek Supercaliber, make sure you drop those into the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed this video review and we'll see you next time. Tooroo!